and since we're looking to the future, it's appropriate we bring up Jerry Nickelsburg to give his outlook. Jerry comes to us from the UCLA Anderson School from Los Angeles, and many people feel that the Anderson School is the most reliable institution in the state for the forecast they offer about the fluctuations in the California economy. Now, it turns out Jerry's a great mushroom hunter, so he's been in paradise the last few days. His idea of fun, going after mushrooms, so good for Jerry. And let's give him a very warm welcome as he comes up. Jerry?
And by the way, those were Sonoma mushrooms. And excellent mushrooms. They're all gone now. I ate them all. Well, I shared them, but I ate them all. So I'm going to talk about about the U.S. and California economy. And Ben said that prosperity is never guaranteed. And I'm going to show you some slides that really sort of indicate that with regard to the U.S. and California. But I've titled this talk, This Old World Still Looks the Same, as a line from the Eagles. If I had known that y'all had been hosting the Goo Goo Dolls, I would have used a line from one of their songs, but you're going to have to live with the Eagles, I guess. And the reason for the title is that we're in a recovery, and this recovery has kind of moved apace. It's in the sixth year, and kind of each year has looked a lot like the last one, getting better slowly but surely. But the same is quite good depending on where you're at. And so what you see in this slide is total employment, and this is a percentage of the pre-recession peak. It's a measure of how well each state is recovered. The first one over on the left is Texas. We'll see what happens with falling oil prices, how that changes, if at all. Then Minnesota, Colorado, California, Massachusetts, and you could add a few others that are above that horizontal line, which is 100% recovered. But if you just take those states out of the U.S., the rest of the U.S. has not recovered after 6 years of a recovery. This is a very, very uneven recovery, and the benefits have been spread basically to states and to communities like yours, which have focused on technology, that have focused on the new information economy, because that's where you get growth, and then also energy. And if you look across these states and ask, well, what do they have in common? It's not low taxes, it's not lax regulation, it's not right-to-work laws. It is either they're driven by technology or by energy. In the case of Texas, it's both. But that's what they have in common. And so that's really the formula for the future. And as I spoke about last time, it's a formula that Sonoma County has really been able to embody. Turning to the U.S., on the left you see actual GDP growth rates. And as you can see, the pattern looks pretty much the same, but it's been building, and we're now moving to an economy that's above 3%. It's above average growth rate economy. And one of the key reasons for that is consumers are now spending again. Households are spending again. In the wake of the Great Recession, there was a real fear that savings wasn't adequate. You weren't going to get your savings out of appreciation in your home or your 401k, and our savings rates were actually down around zero. So in the first 5 years of this recovery, households have been trying to push up their savings rates and have now pushed them up into the 5 to 6% range, pushing down debt. And that seems to be a fairly comfortable level. We've got more consumer confidence, more consumption going on. That's supporting an above 3% and above average growth rate, because consumption is 70% of GDP. Housing is another strong point, but what you tended to see in the past were these big housing, sort of euphoria in housing, boom and bust cycles. This one's had a slow build, and we're sitting right around 1 million units per year. Used to be that about 1.5 was what you needed for population growth and for replacement, but demographics have now pushed that down to about 1.4, 1.38, somewhere in there, we're not there yet, and we're sort of moving slowly in that direction. So that's really healthy that we're adding new residential construction at sort of a very measured pace. Another component of GDP is equipment and software. Firms have to compete on the world stage today. How do you do that? It's through increased productivity. You get that by automation, by robotics, by investment in equipment and software, not just in the U.S., but abroad. That is an important part of the U.S. economy now. That's sort of that tech part that's really driving it, and an important part of the California economy. And we see that continuing to grow at 8%, then slowing a little bit to 6%, but that's not an indication of a problem sort of returning to sort of a more average level. And that gives us job growth in the U.S. of about 230,000 per month. And that's good job growth. And as you can see from this graph, we're going to achieve record high levels of employment in the U.S. So a real recovery, at least numerically, a real recovery in the U.S., and we're getting lots of jobs, and we expect that to drive the unemployment rate down in the U.S. to 5%. So full employment, sometime in the next 2 years, we have it out in 2017, but 2016, but full employment is certainly on the way, and we're making good progress. But now that I've told you a lot of good news, let's move to unemployment, which is a little different in the U.S. this time. What you see on this graph is the rate of unemployment, so it's unemployed to population, of those who have been unemployed 5 weeks or less. And as you can see, we're back to normal. That's a full recovery. Those who have been unemployed 5 weeks or less are looking at a very normal economy, a very normal, prospering economy. Similarly, if you look at 5 to 14 weeks, it's a full recovery. So unemployment doing just fine, and the pattern, they mimic one another. They're highly correlated. That's 14 to 26 weeks, and so our labor markets are looking pretty good until you get to this one, which is over 27 weeks. So that's the long-term unemployed. And again, you look at this historical pattern, and everything is correlated, nicely correlated, until you get to 2008. That's the long-term unemployed, and it shoots up. It's a totally different pattern. And it still has not come back to normal. Now, you might say, oh, yes, but it's falling fast, so not to worry. The reason why it's falling fast is not because the long-term unemployed are getting jobs. It's because they're dropping out of the labor market. And the statistics, such as the last jobs report that came out, and it said, unemployment rates come down and all of this good news, and then they had one line there. And the long-term unemployed, no change. And you can see that. Another way that you can see that is in this graph. So the blue line there is the ratio of labor force growth, so those are those in the job market, either employed or looking for a job, to population growth. And so you'd think that would be about 1-to-1, right? As the population grows, so does the labor force at about the same rate. It jumps up to 1.5-to-1 in the 70s and 80s, and that's women entering the labor force. And then you get to the Great Recession. Those red shaded areas are recessions. You get to the Great Recession, and what you see is that this thing drops, and it drops down to 0, and it doesn't, it's actually up at about 0.5, but it doesn't really recover. And again, that's partially because of baby boomers retiring, partially because of a change in tastes and preferences. So 2-earner families who become 1-earner families, and one of them is long-term unemployed, have said, you know what, I kind of like this, we can do without the other things, and are not coming back into the labor force. But part of it, and about a third of it, are these long-term unemployed who would be in the labor market, but for the fact that they're late career, their skills don't match what's growing today, and they're frustrated. After 5 years of looking for a job, they said, we've got to find something else to do with our lives because this isn't happening. So we still have a serious problem in terms of our labor force in the U.S., even though we're moving towards full employment, and it happens to be sort of the older segment of our labor force, those have been coming out of traditional manufacturing, and I'm going to show you something on construction shortly in California. So upsides to the forecast, we have oil prices have plummeted, and so that's good news and bad news for the U.S. economy. The good news is that households have about 170 to 200 billion more dollars to spend on other things, and they're spending it. The bad news is that we are now producing a lot of our own oil, and so those who are involved in oil production are finding life is becoming a little tougher, and if you net that out, you get at right around $80 a barrel, a $70-some billion injection into the U.S. economy. At today's prices, it's over $100 billion. So this is a stimulus package that didn't require congressional approval, and that doesn't end up reducing taxes. So it's a great stimulus package, and this is an upside to the forecast. If, in fact, oil prices don't go back up into the 70 to 80 range, you're going to see faster growth than that sort of 3.1, 3.2 that I showed you earlier. Secondly, the Federal Reserve is moving to more normal financial markets. We expect interest rates to start moving in June. And so the Federal Reserve will be not intervening as much, and we'll get kind of more normal lending. Banks are starting to lend more, and so we're moving kind of out of that crisis mode. And the slow growth that we've had means that we have not developed those imbalances either in housing or in automobiles or in other sectors that typically lead to recession. So the longest recession that we've had, longest expansion that we've had in the U.S. is 11 years, and we may hit that because we're just sort of moving apace and not really building up the pressures that would normally move you into a recession. Now, I'm not making a forecast that we're going to hit that. Our forecast is that for the next couple of years, things are looking pretty good, that we don't see anything in the data that would lead us to be concerned about a recession. There's always geopolitical risk. There always is risk, that things will go awry, but at least there's nothing in the data that suggests that we have any sort of impending downturn. So turning to California, and I thought I'd start this off with a picture from last week. I have some friends who live up in Sebastopol, and so this is their vineyard, the Rusty Gate Vineyard, to get us started. And California, non-farm payroll, 1.3% above peak. So numerically, we have recovered all the jobs lost in the Great Recession. If you look at the trend, though, the trend from 1990 on up to 2007, we're below that trend. And that means that we have the ability to continue to grow and to increase employment in California. And this is the forecast that I just put up there, the dotted line, and we are growing towards that. That gap is narrowing, but it's narrowing slowly. Just as the U.S. economy is growing slowly, so is California, although we're growing faster than the U.S. By sector, that growth is fairly widespread, and it's spread between things like leisure and hospitality, professional and business services, healthcare, and so we've got fairly solid growth here in California. Over on the right-hand side, you see education, which is negative. That's kind of an anomaly. That's a consequence of the pullback of the federal government in providing student loans for a number of for-profit colleges and universities. And so that's a temporary thing. Education has been a big growth sector. The other two are federal government, which is still contracting. That's not transfer payments. That's purchases of goods and services. That's things like computers and cars and bombs and things like that. And the other one is non-durable goods manufacturing. Non-durable goods manufacturing, so those are consumables, has been contracting. Employment in that sector has been contracting all over the U.S. and in California as well. And Sonoma County is really an anomaly. You have had good, solid growth in non-durable goods manufacturing. And of course, the reason is sort of obvious. It's wine, it's beer, it's specialty food products, and those have really been growing here, whereas that sector has been contracting elsewhere. But just as with the U.S., this is a bifurcated economy. Some places are left behind. The red areas are inland counties. The blue are coastal counties. Green is Sonoma. And you see that the red is over on the right, growing much slower than, that's not growth, that's recovery, sorry. Having not recovered, being below the 100%, and it's really the coastal counties in California that have grown, that have now recovered, that have unemployment rates that are below the U.S., with two exceptions. One is Kern County, and that's petroleum. The big energy boom in Kern County, and the other is Merced. So you might say, well, why Merced? Why would Merced have fully recovered? That seems a little strange. If you look behind the numbers, and it's really illustrative of what's going on in California, Merced County lost a lot of jobs in manufacturing and retail and construction in the recession. They haven't gotten those back. But Merced happens to be home of UC Merced. And the state of California is expanding the UC system. Where do you expand? In the newest, smallest UC. And it happens that the number of people hired by UC Merced is equal to the number who lost their jobs in those other three sectors. But I don't think they're the same people. So this is, again, illustrative of the kind of labor market problems that we have, in spite of the fact that we have a really good recovery going on. And in terms of rates of growth, so this is the last 12 months, November 2013 to November 2014, and you'll see in the brochures that Sonoma, which is again in green, has a lower growth rate, but in the last few months that's really picked up. And so again, if you move left to right, the U.S. is in red there. If you move left to right, you've got Silicon Valley, San Francisco, San Diego, Sonoma, and the East Bay. And you go all the way over the right, it's Los Angeles, it's the Inland Empire, it's the San Joaquin Valley. And so that difference that you saw in terms of recovery, well, the inland areas are not catching up to the coast. That difference is getting larger and larger. And so, again, a very uneven recovery. In terms of housing, this is the median home prices for houses in California. If you used any other index, the Case-Shiller, the FHFA Home Price Index, you get exactly the same result. We saw in 2013 and early into 2014 real rapid home appreciation here in California, and I know that you've seen that here in Sonoma. But that's really kind of tapered off. And if you look at this graph, what you see is on the right-hand side, it's kind of flattened, that home price appreciation. And that brought us back to prices that were the same as the prices we saw in 2004. That means these are nominal prices. These are just actual dollars, not adjusted for inflation. That means that an investment in housing in 2004 paid zero return, and after adjusting for inflation is negative. So those are hardly bubble prices. And given that the home price appreciation has now slowed, it's really kind of a return to a normal housing market that we have going on here in California. And key to that is what's happening in foreclosures. The red line on this graph is foreclosures in California, and they have fallen to be down now about 6% of all home sales. In the early part of the millennial decade, they were 8% of home sales. So we have this huge foreclosure mess pretty much behind us. The foreclosures are about normal. If you add into that short sales, we're up at about 11%. Back in sort of more normal times, we were selling a lot more houses than today. So this part of the market is pretty normal, and that home price appreciation is starting to bring more homes onto the market being listed for sale, because it's been a very small inventory. People have been nervous about kind of, what am I going to get for my house? We're getting more houses onto the market, a more normal housing market, and that's going to stimulate more home construction. But when it comes to home construction, we've got something different happening here in California than before. This graph is the percentage of homes, percentage of new home permits, so these are building permits, that are single-family homes, single-family detached homes. And with the exception of that one little episode in the 80s, which was tax-induced. So this is during the S&L boom, and there were tax credits for building apartments, which were expiring. Except for that time, we have been predominantly building single-family homes in California. Except now, since the recession, the demand has been for multifamily housing. Jobs are being created along the coast, jobs are being created in the denser parts of the state, and people want to live closer to work. And that's a demand for multifamily housing. So there many good things about that. One of the good things is that we're getting household formation and we're getting new home construction. But if you look at this, a multifamily home, building a multifamily home is different from building a single-family home. And if you just take the permits and translate that into construction, so this is using data from the American Home Builders Association, and this is the induced direct labor in building houses in California. So it's taking the permits times the number of jobs that supports. It's not supervisors, it's not management, but it's direct jobs. And you can see the building boom and then the crash and kind of our slow increase. But this red line that I put up there, what I'm doing is a thought experiment. We've got this shift from single-family to multifamily homes. And a multifamily home takes a lot fewer people to build than a single-family home. It's about a third. So if we were to have in California the same mix going back of 50-50, multifamily to single-family, how many workers would have been employed in building houses in California? That's the red line. And it's a difference that's equal to about somewhere between 10 and 15% of the total construction labor force. So as we go forward, we think that mix of 50-50 is going to continue, which means that once we fully recover in building homes in California, there's still going to be 15% of the former construction jobs that aren't coming back. So again, as with manufacturing, in construction, we're getting a lot of jobs back, and you see that here in Sonoma County, but we're not going to get the same number of jobs back that we lost. Again, a shift in the economy towards the tech economy, towards the new information economy, and away from some of the older ways that we used to generate jobs. We do a Bay Area model, so this is an aggregate for the whole Bay Area. And so I want to show you that. The first is Bay Area payroll employment. And it is not at record highs because the record was in 2000, but close. And our forecast is that the things that are driving the Bay Area economy are going to continue to drive it at pretty decent rate of growth. It will still lead California in growth and still lead the U.S. in growth. And that's going to generate jobs that are going to be at record highs, fully recovered from 2000 and then some. So very good news in the Bay Area. In terms of unemployment, and you saw earlier, and Ben talked about, unemployment is below the U.S. unemployment rate, and our forecast is for the U.S. unemployment rate in 2016 to get down to 5%. In the Bay Area to be down in the 4s and in the lower 4s. So more than full employment, that's going to attract more people into the Bay Area. And again, what does that mean? That means more housing, more construction, and more vibrant growth. And the risks to this are the same risks that we've talked about with respect to the U.S. economy and to the California economy. They're really external risks. They're things that we kind of can't control. We've seen over this recovery that it kind of doesn't matter if Congress functions or not. The economy continues to recover apace, and so that's not a real worry. We made it through the worries about the fiscal cliff and just kept growing. And so the risks are real external risks, but right now they don't seem too great, even though external to the U.S., there are a lot of problems in the world. But let me just digress on that for a moment. When we think about the rest of the world, it's kind of a mess. And the U.S. is really the only bright spot. The U.S. and our NAFTA partners, Mexico and Canada. Everywhere else, toying with recession, maybe in recession. China's slowing growth to the point where it is, a de facto recession, and the U.S. is not. So we are much more insulated from the rest of the world than we imagined. Now, we could have much faster growth, but we're certainly the bright spot here. So those external risks, at least at the moment, in spite of the fact that we've got a more dangerous and more turbulent world, don't seem to be great as we go forward in 2015 and 2016. Which brings me to the California forecast. And the California forecast is normally that doesn't come out the same numbers each time, 2.2, 2.2, 2.2. That wasn't just because I got lazy and kept hitting the repeat. That's the way the model numbers came out when you adjusted for all of the factors that are going on. But that 2.2% growth in employment is faster than the U.S. We'll still be one of the leaders of the U.S. economy, and that drives our unemployment rate down to 5.6% average for the year 2016. It is right down around 5% at the end of 2016. And so we've got good growth in jobs. We have unemployment rate coming down, personal income going up, and new building permits going up. So good news for California and good news as it reflects here in Sonoma County. And we got a couple of pictures at the bottom. The one on the left is of oracle bones from the Shang Dynasty. So 3,000 years ago in China, they used these for forecasting. I'm not going to tell you if I used oracle bones here, but I'm not sure forecasting has really advanced too much since that time. But the right one is sort of is a happy picture again of Rusty Gate, and that's their peach orchard. So as we now move to Sonoma County and looking in more depth, I want to leave you with this graph. So this is employment in Sonoma County. This is total employment. It includes the self-employed, which is a big component of the local economy, fully recovered from the Great Recession and then some. So things are looking up here, and from our Bay Area forecast, you can expect this line. So there you could probably use a ruler, and that line is going to continue to increase as we move forward over the next 2 years. Thank you.